friends ever since. And I've been delighted to be able to help Jenny with her, helping to publicise her latest challenge, which is her website, TalkMatters. Jenny's had a very long and successful career in various guises. She has done a bit of theatre, radio, writing, but she is absolutely passionate, as those of you who know her, about interfaith relationships through the CCJ, Three Faiths Dialogue, and Nish Anashim, the Muslim Jewish Women's Project. I'm not going to steal Jenny's thunder, so I'll let her now explain all about TalkMatters. It's the most fantastic project that she does single-handedly, and it's her drive and her belief that has taken it to where it is today. So Jenny, over to you. If I can just ask if Jenny will take questions after she's given her talk. And could you put your questions on the chat, and then I will administer them from there.
Thank you, Aviva. It was March 2020, the Dan Hotel in Jerusalem. The guests arrived from many walks of life: Israeli Jews, Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, Palestinian residents of Jerusalem, religious, secular, but all had one thing in common. They were among thousands of COVID-19 patients that the IDF had quarantined in hotels throughout the country. From mid-March until early May, the Dan Jerusalem hosted about 180 guests. Some arrived by ambulance, others came straight from work or from the airport. They could only leave after they tested negative twice. None were staying at the hotel by choice. So how do people who don't usually mix, how are they going to get on? It was a real social experiment, and is often the case, the outcome relied on exceptional individuals who were prepared to break the boundaries and set the scene. The very first COVID guests to check in were 19-year-old Aisha and her 21-year-old brother, Mohammed. Both were employed as caretakers at an Israeli hospital where they'd been infected by the virus. As the hotel began filling with more guests, Aisha noticed at dinner time that everyone was sticking with people from their own backgrounds. She decided to do things differently. Wearing a hijab, she sat down with a Jewish couple, Gina and Amram, wearing his kippah, and she said, "I chose to sit with them because they were laughing." By the end of the meal, they were laughing together and singing Inta Omri, You Are My Life, an Egyptian song from the 1960s, still popular now. As the days went by, the Arab and Jewish guests began intermingling more. The biggest test of togetherness came in early April, a month after the first guests had arrived. Pesach was approaching. The hotel management decided to open the banquet hall for guests to host their own Sidorim. Some of the non-Orthodox Jewish guests wanted to film the Seder. To avoid friction, the hotel divided the banquet hall so there could be two separate Sidorim. A floor-to-ceiling barrier was set up to separate the Orthodox Jews from the rest. The Jewish couple, Amram and Gina, walked in and saw the barrier, and Gina said to Amram, "I can't do the Seder like this. Everybody's getting along well in this hotel. What's happening here?" Amram agreed and said, "Give me a couple of minutes." He recruited some younger guests to dismantle the barrier. An ultra-Orthodox man jumped up, not to protest, but to help move the barrier into the corner. Then, as one room, about 180 people in all, they blessed the wine and the Seder began. Aisha and Mohammed and the other Muslims and Christians in the hotel celebrating with everyone. The Dan Hotel had become the Corona Hotel. The life the guests created together became the envy of the rest of Israel. Now, I tell you this real life story because that's what my new initiative, TalkMatters, is all about. Giving Jews and Arabs the opportunity to talk and meet together, but hopefully without having to go through a pandemic to get there. But despite the pain of losing friends and missing family, these last few months, perversely, this period of time has allowed me to set up a website, use Zoom to meet people in Israel and in the West Bank, read and write articles, and put on public webinars. TalkMatters was launched by way of an online party at the end of June 2020. We are not fundraising. The purpose is to inform the UK public about initiatives that encourage direct communication between Jewish and Arab Palestinian residents, Arab Palestinian citizens, first of all, I should say, of Israel, as well as Jewish and Arab Palestinian residents in the West Bank. And let's make the distinction clear. I'm talking about two groups of people in two different areas, within the Green Line and in the West Bank. Israeli Arabs who increasingly identify as Palestinian citizens of Israel. And we're talking about residents in the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians. As well as direct communication between these people, my other purpose is to connect and resource the many UK and Israeli projects that enable Jews and Arabs to meet and talk together. And at this point, I must say it's not just me doing this. I'd like to really thank Aviva here for all her PR support and Daniel O'Neill, who's not with us tonight, but for all his techie support. So why are these initiatives important? Well, there's a definite lack of dialogue between Jews and Arabs. And that lack of dialogue certainly doesn't help the polarization that exists between the two groups. A couple of weeks ago, saw new research published by the Hebrew University. It reveals alarming levels of intergroup hate between different strands of Israeli society, secular, religious, and Haredi Jews, and Palestinian citizens of Israel. It shows dangerous levels of, and I quote, stereotypical and negative or severely negative views between groups, with half of religious Jewish youth denying Arab Palestinian citizens the right to vote, as well as nearly a quarter of secular Jewish Israelis and a similar number of Palestinian citizens expressing hatred towards one another. This raises the question, how do we tackle the stereotyping and inherent biases that have become social norms? I say that direct communication is an important part of the answer. And that is why initiatives that bring people together, and the younger the better, are worthwhile. Research shows feelings are harder to change as people grow up. We also know that one of the best ways of reducing feelings of polarization leading to hatred is to allow young people to openly and safely discuss their fears and concerns with each other. I'm just going to have a little drop of water now before I carry on. And this is what happens at Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam, Oasis of Peace in English. The village in Israel that is halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem runs 4 educational institutions, including a primary school with 268 children, many coming from the surrounding local Jewish and Arab villages and towns. A long time ago, in the 1980s, I was looking for positive stories, good news stories about Israel for BBC Radio. And I found many, including new irrigation methods for tomatoes for Radio 4's Farming World, and a garden showing all the plants and trees in biblical times for Woman's Hour. but none that inspired me so much as Neve Shalom. I don't know if Jackie Dyson's here tonight, but she's somebody else who must have also been very inspired, because she is a patron of the British Friends of Neve Shalom, and she has supported me over the years with that project. So let's take a look at what goes on in the primary school. And recently the staff have written a new educational program that's suitable for every school in Israel. It's called the Chotam program. So Jeff is going to put this video on for us now so we can look at Neve Shalom wa Hatal Salam. Thank you.
בוקר טוב.
صباح الخير.
بكر טוב.
اهدر شو هاد.
בוקר טוב يا
صباح
مان.
الخير.
بوكر توف.
زي ما انتم عارفين احنا بدينا بفترة الإنسان والأرض.
בשביל זה אנחנו הולכים עכשיו לחלק לכם דפים, וכל אחד צריך לחשוב עם עצמו מה הקשר שלי עם האדמה.
תוכנית חותם היא תוכנית לימודים בית ספרית שכתב צוות בית הספר בנווה שלום. התלמידים והצוות שלנו מגיעים מ6 רשויות שונות, מ24 יישובים, וכל אחד מביא איתו את השפה שלו, את הדת שלו, את התרבות שלו, והתוכנית הזאת נותנת מקום לכל אחד מהם, גם למורים וגם לתלמידים.
ارفعوا رأسكم. أشوف.
תרימו רק ידיים.
נלעב עליה.
האדמה מספקת לנו הרבה דברים שעוזרים לנו לחיות. אנחנו נعيش على الأرض. אנחנו חיים על האדמה. الإنسان مصنوع من طين.
أنا بعلم المواضيع هاي من إلي 19 سنة، ومع السنين اللي بشوفه التغيير على الطلاب قديش بيزيد من هويتهم، من شخصيتهم تبقى قوية، لأنه بيبقى عارف إني أنا عززته بهذا الموقف، صار عنده ثقة بنفسه إنه هو يحكي عن حضارته، يحكي لغته، يعرف مين هو، ليش هو وكيف هو.
ולא רק שהם פוגשים את הזהות של עצמם ונגעים מתוך זה, אלא גם שהם נחשפים לזהות של האחר ומפתחים את השריר של הסובלנות.
أنا بعرف منيح يعني عربي واللغة تبعتي والحضارة تبعتي، وكمان بدي أتعلم الحضارة اليهودية وإيش بيعملوا اليهود وبالدين تبعهم والهيك شيء. يعني נפתעתי שידעתי שאתם מצלמים, גם אנחנו מצלמים ברמדאן, אבל אתם יותר ממנו שעות. איך אתם יכולים? בחותם אנחנו לומדים על האחר ועל הדתות של האחר, ובייחוד באור ונורות, שזה הנושא הקודם שעשינו. הקריסמס, הולדת הנביא מוחמד וחנוכה נפגשו, ואז הבאנו את ההורים לפה ועשינו להם תחנות. אנחנו ידענו יותר מההורים, מסתבר. בשנה שעברה למדנו על היישוב שלנו וחקרנו עליו וגילינו כל מיני דברים חדשים.
ובקוראן מכתוב ולקד חלקנה الإنسان من سلالة من طين.
וגם בקוראן כתוב, האדם נוצר מן האדמה. בעצם אנחנו רואים שלשלושת הדתות יש קשר הדוק בין האדם לאדמה.
את תוכנית חותם החלטנו שאנחנו רוצים להפיץ מעבר לבית הספר, ובשביל זה בחרנו כמה יחידות מתוך התוכנית והפכנו אותם ליחידות אינטראקטיביות מכיתות ג', ד' וה', שבתי ספר אחרים יוכלו לקחת אותם ולהשתמש בהם בצורה אינטראקטיבית בכיתה. מה שהתוכנית הזאת מאפשרת לתלמידים זה בעצם להביא את התרבות של כל אחד מכל מיני כיוונים, מהכיוון הפילוסופי, מהכיוון של מקורות התרבות, של מקורות הדת, מכיוון של טקסטים, אנשים חשובים, מנהיגים, וגם אנשים אפילו מהמשפחות שלהם שבאים ומספרים את הסיפור של התרבות. לא משנה אם זה יהודי, ערבי או כל תרבות אחרת.
מה שמגניב אותי זה שזה גורם לי לפגוש את התרבויות האלו וללמוד אותן, כדי שנוכל להעביר את זה הלאה. שזה בעצם דינמיקה שכל הזמן מכריחה אותך ללמוד. כל אחד לכתוב עכשיו מילה אחת, מה אומרת לו מילה אדם ומה אומרת לו מילה אדמה.
התוכנית עושה שימוש מגוון מאוד בדרכי הוראה ולמידה. זה גם למידת פנים וגם למידת חוץ. זה הרבה מאוד למידת עמיתים בתוך הכיתה, עבודה בקבוצות, פרויקט של חקר ששולח את הילדים חזרה לכפר או לעיר שמהם הם באים, למשפחה. חותם היא תוכנית שמתאימה לכל בית ספר שיש בו קבוצות שונות של תלמידים שבאים משפה שונה, מרקע שונה, גם תלמידים יהודים וגם תלמידים ערבים. כל כיתה שיש בה רוסים, אתיופים, קיבוצניקים עירוניים. אין שום סיבה שלא נלמד ביחד ולא נכיר אחד את השני. ואולי אם נעשה את זה מגיל מאוד צעיר, אז אנחנו לא נצטרך יום מלחמה בגזענות או יום בעד סובלנות, אלא אנחנו פשוט נגדל להיות כאלה.
Thank you, Jeff, for putting that on. So, as the head teacher, Carmela, said, this program encourages children to learn about their own and their classmates' backgrounds. All good stuff. And through Neve Shalom, all those years ago, I met and I still meet Jews and Arabs who are talking to each other. But the world doesn't know about that or really want to know these stories. These people don't make the news. It's only the bad stories that make the news. And this I really found out to my cost when I approached a BBC producer with an idea about Neve Shalom, a feature about Neve Shalom. And he actually told me to come back when the place was closing down, falling apart. Well, it certainly hasn't done that. It's thriving with, as I mentioned, 4 educational institutions. So this is the place that got me started in the talk business. I chaired, and now as a trustee, I've been involved with the British Friends, it seems like forever. But over the last few years, I just realized that this isn't enough. There are many initiatives that bring people together. And the UK task force that some of you may know used to act as an umbrella organization for such initiatives. But in 2017, it folded with a great loss to the community. And some of the work that the task force was doing is very much, well, TalkMatters is reflecting some of that work. So, knowing what's going on in the ground and encouraging greater understanding between Arabs and Jews, I don't think it's just important for Israel. It's important here in the UK, where there's a resurgence of anti-Zionism muddled up with anti-Semitism. A new publication released by the Jewish Policy Research Institute and the CST shows empirically that there is a strong connection between extreme hostility towards Israel and traditional forms of anti-Semitism. Anytime conflict is reported from Israel, there's a rise of anti-Semitism here. People need to know, even if it's only online, a Palestinian and a Jew who are talking and listening to one another. And that way, we are more likely to stop our stereotyping of the other group and begin to understand that most people aren't extremists and don't hate each other. They just want to get on with their lives, and that there's no reason to consider that the everyday Jew or Muslim in the street is the enemy. A better understanding of Israel leads to less ignorance and confusion about Zionism and anti-Semitism. But let's get back to the initiatives. We're now going to see another short video. The initiative is called Tech to Peace. Instead of primary school pupils, we're going to look at a program that brings Israelis and Palestinian young adults together, helping to create positive relationships through a common interest in high tech. Thank you, Jeff, again.
Although Israelis and Palestinians live close together geographically, our communities are so divided. There remains between us an extremely negative atmosphere of hatred, anger, and suspicion, and there are few opportunities for positive interaction.
Tech to Peace is so important because it gives a very special opportunity for young adults from Israel and from Palestine to get to know each other in a very real and honest way.
It also helps people in regions of conflict meet and talk with each other, share stories with each other, empathize with each other, and most importantly, understand each other.
We are creating amazing relationships between people from two different nations that don't get along very well, and the more we create those positive relationships, the word spreads and it gets out to everyone's families and friends, and I think that's the first step to making a change.
Tech to Peace is an NGO that brings together young Israelis and Palestinians through the study of technology, entrepreneurship and conflict resolution.
We got to work together to get to know each other better and to trust one another more.
We offer 2-week seminars where participants study, eat and live together, and afterwards have the opportunity to continue their connection.
I met some people in one day and I have my amazing roommate, and we're like sisters now.
Our goal is to help moderate Israelis and Palestinians create long-term friendships and partnerships, and to build strong communities of people across the divide who are able to cooperate and earn a good living together. We believe that high-tech provides a level playing field without boundaries, where hatred and differences can be put aside.
And I also wanted to know my environment. I wanted to know the people that live in my surroundings and see how is their life and how are they different from my life and how are they similar. And I got to know that in the end that we're all humans.
So you've just seen Tech to Peace, and that last line, we are all humans. Well, there are many, many other initiatives that emphasize that we are all humans, and TalkMatters is now promoting over 30 of them. Please look at our directory, www.talkmatters, I think it's behind me, .info. In the directory, you'll see a lot of organizations and what they do. So some of them come together for particular interests in music, dance, business, ecology, technology, drama, and others come together in much sadder circumstances, like the Family Circle initiative, involving more than 600 families, all who've lost someone close to the ongoing conflict. But the Family Circle believes in reconciliation, not revenge, and they go out together, one Israeli and one Palestinian, to schools, to clubs, to talk and share their stories. And of course, there are projects that people come together to talk about politics. And I must say that whether they are my particular views or not, it doesn't matter. I support all these projects that enable people to talk to one another face to face. The reality is that social and cultural divides in Israel are great and growing. Arabs and Jews don't mix socially. The identity of both groups are built on a denial of each other, a state of mind, almost as though each side is invisible to each other. There's a word that I've come across recently that sums it up: diaphobia, apparently not in many dictionaries, but we'll have to ask Ian about that later, I think. He has so many dictionaries, but the word is diaphobia. And it's about the fear of being affected or directly influenced by the other, the fear of hearing something you don't want to hear, a kind of deafness. Maybe it's just easier to accept all the other group as the enemy. And in some ways, I understand that. Yes, there are sound reasons for closing the mind to things that are just too difficult to deal with. Let us consider the deepest concerns and perceptions from Israelis and Palestinians who live in Israel and from Palestinians who live in the West Bank. First of all, from Jewish people living in Israel. Here in Israel, we Jews need to protect ourselves. We are always at war, even when not at war. Terrorists are all around us. We have to let our children go to the army when they are still kids. Our homes have to have shelters. There is no point in talking peace because the Arabs have had too many chances and thrown them away. In their heart of hearts, they really hate us and want to kill us. And from Arabs living in Israel. We Palestinian Arabs living in Israel face discrimination. The rules of law are more stringent for us than for Israelis. They have all the power. And from the Palestinians in the West Bank. We West Bank Palestinian Arabs are humiliated and oppressed. We are turned away at checkpoints, stopped from going to work. Our olive fields are destroyed, our homes demolished. We cannot travel. We cannot buy property in any area we choose. Essentially, what we hear is Palestinians are under occupation and have the right to resist, versus Israelis are under existential threat and have the right to secure themselves. A lose-lose situation that reflects the deep insecurities on both sides, unable to become a win-win because it ignores the current circumstances and past history of both narratives. Obviously, Jewish Israelis need more and better education in Arabic and Arab culture, and Palestinian Arabs need more and better education in Jewish culture and history. Across every divide in Israeli society between Jew and Arab, religious and secular, Israel's system is a recipe for national fragmentation, not national common purpose. But at the moment, with yesterday's election and the forthcoming election for the Palestinian Authority in May, these issues, as usual, are not on the table. Yet the political challenge is there. It's there in black and white in Israel's Declaration of Independence, promising social and political equality for all Israel's citizens. A top-down and bottom-up approach is necessary. If I can't do anything about the top-down, about policy changes at Israeli government and Palestinian Authority level, I can support the long-term grassroots projects that are essential to build the foundation for future cooperation. And much more than that, I fervently believe that we are all human beings made in the image of God, and that I, as a proud Jew and Zionist, have a moral duty to follow the biblical injunction to know the heart of the stranger, seeing you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And this is very much the ethos of the next initiative that I'd like to show you. With over 100 groups in Israel and the West Bank, the Interfaith Encounter Association fosters dialogue between the three religions. They believe that if religion is part of the problem, then it should also be part of the solution.
The actual situation in Jerusalem is much better than what people think. The Jerusalemites kind of live in a situation that I call sometimes passive peace. They don't do anything bad to the other. They don't do anything good to the other. They just ignore the other. So you could see people moving in parallel tracks and ignoring each other.
At the Interfaith Encounter Association, we aim to bring together Muslims, Christians, Jews, and any other faith, people of any other faith, together in order to talk and develop a dialogue on whatever topic they like. We don't limit the groups on topics that they can discuss. We give them the freedom to decide what to say and what to talk about. They can talk about politics, religion, personal life, or any other aspect of life that they like. And the most important thing that we seek is that people do sit together and do talk.
It's to recognize new persons from other religion, to know about them, to learn more about them. Maybe we used to learn from the TV some things, but when we started to meet each other, we learned more and exactly the things we wanted to know.
If we give the people the chance to have a good, real heart-to-heart conversation, usually the prejudices go away instantly.
We are ordinary people, actually, and we talk about, it's definitely a safe place to talk about our personal lives. It's a very comfortable place.
I think we are building a safe place. It wasn't from the beginning. We have to work so it will be a safe environment.
All the time I have heard that there's conflict between Arabs and Jews. So because they are neighbors and we are live near each other, and it is not from, it is from before many years. So I understand that we can live with other and we can understand each other without this conflict. I have decided to be, the children will be in these groups so that they can do and they can ask and they can feel all what they want and what they feel, and to learn many things about the others and to decide that it is good for them or it is bad for them.
Sometimes you can see that happening in front of your eyes, how they change. They are so surprised with the fact that the other person is also human and share many concerns. And it also goes to a much deeper level, on existential levels of worshiping God, the connection with God, challenges of religion and modernity, challenges of being sometimes non-religious but still wanting to maintain some kind of connection with your heritage and so on. And these are the places where people really share themselves in a deep way and connect, therefore, in a deep way. And they become friends.
So that was the Interfaith Encounter Association, and Yehuda Stolov that you saw at the end of there is the founder. And he's a really inspirational leader who, from an Orthodox Jewish perspective, puts his heart and soul into this amazing project. And I know that because Terry and I met him just before lockdown, and I now attend one of the many study groups that bring together rabbis, priests, imams, and lay people to look at New Testament texts. So I'm in Jerusalem every month with them. So what else is there to tell you? Well, from the TalkMatters point of view, our mailing list is growing and we've already hosted 5 webinars. And last week we introduced Roots, a project in the West Bank where Jewish settlers and Palestinians work together. We introduced them to Muswell Hill United Synagogue. There's just really so much to do. More and more initiatives want to come on board. We try to publish the latest positive news stories, articles, interviews, video clips, and letters. And there's a lot more we could publish if there were more hours in the day. And to the way forward, well, I hope I've demonstrated that getting to know a person face to face, one-to-one, is the first step on the immensely complex journey to a brighter future for the region. So in practice, that means more Jews to meet more Palestinians and talk to them, and more Palestinians to meet and talk to a Jew, more cooperative initiatives in Israel, Palestine, and more UK support for those initiatives, all helping really to have the right people and the institutions in place when the day eventually dawns. A new day, a day that celebrates Palestinian freedom and independence alongside a secure Israel home, a Jewish homeland in Israel. And I'm going to end with Rabbi Tarfon, who in the Ethics of the Fathers said, "It is not for you to complete the task, but neither are you free to stand aside from it." And I say, look at the website, join the mailing list so you can learn more about both narratives. so you too can support the vital work that's going on. I have to end by saying that talk matters. Thank you. Thank you. I can't hear you, Aviva.
I'm here. I'm going to talk now. That was terrific. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Jenny. I think the other thing we could say is that when the world returns to some sort of travel, obviously, if you're going to Israel and you want to be introduced to some of these projects, we'd be very happy to do that as well. We've got some questions, Jenny. So the first question was from Stuart Soloway, who wanted to know whether you felt that the 2-3 years in the IDF with Israelis and Palestinians, Christians, Muslims together help or hinder the process for the future?
Well, I don't think that the majority of Israeli Arabs, well, I know they don't go into the army. So I don't see that there's any help there. I think it would be marvelous if more Arabs went into the army. I know a few do, Druze do, but I don't think the majority of Israeli Arabs go into the army. But what I would say on that is that some of the projects, and I'm thinking particularly of one which is called Sipura Haikaya, Sipura story in Hebrew, Haikaya story in Arabic. It's attempting now to have sessions to go into the army, the young ones when they start, to tell them about the work that they're doing. And I think there are other initiatives. That's just one that I know of recently, who are trying to talk to people in the army, to talk to young recruits, yeah. But I don't think at the moment, unfortunately, that we're at the stage where Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews are meeting in the army.
Sharon Feldman asked, on the Jewish side, are the highest percentage of involvement are coming from observant Jews or traditional Jews?
That's really, really interesting question, because the last organization you just saw, the Interfaith Encounter Association, the Jews there, a lot of them are observant Jews. Now, if you go to the first one that I showed you, Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam, it's a very secular place. And you have everything in between. And yes, but I think for religious Jews to be involved, there has to be kosher food, there has to be certain conditions before they're going to get involved, so it makes it much more difficult. But within something like the Interfaith Encounter Association, I can see that Orthodox Jews are involved. But that isn't really good enough, because they need to be involved with music, with drama, with lots and lots of other projects too.
Thank you. Meryl Dresner asked, do any high-tech startups exist to close the gaps between the Arabs and the Jews? Because obviously they can work together on these projects.
Yeah, I can't tell you as much as I'd like to about that, Meryl, but I do think they exist, not only from this Tech to Peace, and I know they go on to work together, but we have friends whose children are involved in high-tech projects, but I would need to look into that. But that's really, really, really important. And this organization we're talking about, they do go ahead and work together. Also, there's another project which you might know about, the Avara project. It's an ecological project, and people from there have gone on to work together. And of course, academics work together. We don't hear about that, but when I worked a lot at the London Business School, and there were Israelis who were working with Palestinians there on neutral ground, not in the West Bank. Okay.
And Graham Arnold asks, is there political opposition on either side to these sort of reconciliation projects?
What does that mean? You mean, I mean, some people are not going to agree with them. Do you mean the government at a governmental level?
I think that's what he's referring to.
Governmental level, I don't think there are. There are. I think that Neve Shalom or Hatta Salam has been used by the government on many times to show people what coexistence is going on in Israel. I don't think there's discouragement, but I wouldn't say necessarily, well, there is definitely not encouragement in the fact that policies don't seem to be at the moment influenced by the idea of Jews and Arabs being together and more Jews learning Arabic, more Arabs learning Hebrew, all the things that could help language. First of all, there could be more help. But I must say that the Abraham Fund Initiative and other initiatives are bringing teachers, paying private staff, bringing teachers to Arab teachers, Jewish teachers, and at Neve Shalom, the school there, we have 2 teachers, but the government doesn't pay for 2 teachers. The Ministry of Education pays for 1 teacher, and the friends all over the world pay for extra teachers.
Another question's come in from Anne and Melvin Leach. Given the initial distrust and stereotypes, how are people persuaded initially to participate in these projects?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's usually an individual who you meet somebody by chance. I told you the story to start with of the Corona Hotel, but there is another story that I could have told you that is actually on the front page of the website that has moved a lot of people. And it was about an Israeli Jewish guy whose car broke down and how a Palestinian helped him. He couldn't believe it to start with. He was so frightened, this Palestinian what's he trying to do? But they got chatting, etc., etc. And I think unless you, as an adult, probably is that maybe a work thing, sometimes a work thing, but we don't tend to mix socially. But that's why the schools are important. And I must tell you that there are now 6 hand-in-hand schools all over Israel, which children, Arab children, Jewish children are going to school together. And it's when they're really young. So the projects which encourage that, community projects are really, really important. And some parents want that for their children. They want a different life. They don't want the same as they've seen, and all the anger and the hatred. But we understand, I can also understand the anger and the hatred. And there are some people that I wouldn't be able to have this kind of conversation with because they have been through so much pain. But that is so for both sides.
I think that the other story, maybe, Jenny, is the Palestinian and the Israeli who both lost a child.
Yes.
Because of terrorism.
Yeah.
And how they've come together and formed a group.
Yes, and that one of those people was taken along by somebody else, and they didn't really want to go. They heard about this group and they didn't want to go. But when they started to listen, really to listen to what was happening to their counterpart, they began to understand that there's no point them carrying on this division, this kind of hatred between people. And that must have been, I mean, terribly hard. And that's an organization, again, that I would feel it's very, very difficult. I'm thinking of someone in particular who I know who lost a child, and in Israel, a Jewish boy, and I wouldn't be able to talk to them at the moment about this. It's really, really, really hard.
Graham's asked a supplement to his question, which was, do you know if there's any support from Palestinian politicians?
Well, it'd be interesting. It's interesting to ask that question today.
Yes.
With the joint list, which split, and with one Islamist party with 5 seats. What I do know is the School for Peace, which is an educational institution at Neve Shalom Hat Al Salam, facilitates courses for different professions. And one of them is politicians, young up and coming politicians. And so these people, young politicians, would-be politicians, are meeting each other. So that is positive. I don't know. I can't tell you about the other. Yeah.
Jenny, can you just say a few words about the organisations in the UK you've come across who are trying to forge relationships between Jews and Muslims?
I mentioned the Abraham Fund Initiative, who've done a lot of work with language, with policing, in trying to make social workers, Jewish and Arab social workers, come together and encouraging more Arabs to become police men and women. There's another organization called Solutions Not Sides that's doing a lot of work with young people in this country on the Israel-Palestinian situation, going into Jewish schools. I'm just trying to think of all my organization. I need to look at the directory to remember them all. There are, I just can't.
I mean, I think generally for people listening, it would be you'd be surprised to know how many organisations there are here in the UK that are trying to make a verbal relationship between Jews and Muslims.
Or they're British friends of these, more likely that there'll be British groups who have befriended an Israeli organisation, which is what we're doing. The Abraham Initiative isn't doing that particularly. They don't take one organisation, but the British Friends of Neve Shalom, they're friends of the Hand in Hand schools, which is a really worthwhile thing. There's the Jerusalem Foundation that is supporting a lot of projects, and the New Israel Fund is supporting projects in Israel.
And obviously here it is very important that at a young age people come into schools and talk about Jews and Muslims, and so that hopefully we can get some more sense in our universities.
Absolutely, particularly in universities where anti-Semitism is rife.
I've got a couple of other questions, Jenny, and then I think we ought to draw it to a close. So Sharon says, we know that in Germany in the 1930s, school friends and kindly neighbours still turned against the Jews. So in future times of conflict in Israel, would the talk really matter?
That's a very, very dismal view, and you're right that people turn against each other when the going gets really tough. But I can't work like that. If there's we've got to be positive, and we've got to look forward, and we can't ever think that there would be ever a time as terrible as those times. So I would try to close my eyes to that, be realistic in what I'm doing, because it's not simple, and it's going to take a long time to change people's hearts and minds. But to keep going, I think, is what I want to do.
Valerie's made the point that, of course, in this country, we do have a lot of many local interfaith groups that are working together and are very important.
Yes, and it's hard often to introduce to those interfaith groups the idea of Israel and Palestine. It's not always easy to do that. I've tried to do that with our local group, and I've done it to a certain extent. And when Nasa Nashim, the Muslim Jewish women's group, started, I remember talking to Laura And she said, well, it isn't the time. We have to build up trust between Muslims and Jews in this country before we go into tricky situations in Israel. I think they've changed their mind more recently, because I've been along to a few things where there is some input of Israel, but that's an area that I would really like TalkMatters to get involved with. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meryl says that she'd recommend anybody going to visit Neve Shalom and other projects. It really changes your views to meet these idealists. I must say, I was involved with Hand in Hand some years ago, and I found that was incredible and amazing that, you know, you go to a bar mitzvah of a Jewish boy and there are a lot of Arab friends and their parents there, and they all attended each other's festivals, Sadorim, whatever it might have been. It was really, really, you know, sort of eye-opening. So Jenny, what can we say? I'm going to do a little roundup, and then Ingrid's going to end the evening, and I know at that point she wants to say something about medicine. I know that it has been lovely for all of us to read about how Israel, the good news out of Israel on the vaccine front, and let's hope that TalkMatters will enable more good news to come out of Israel. Various people have asked what they can do themselves to help and to be able to talk. And I think if you look at Jenny's website, which is www.talkmatters.info, www.talkmatters.info, it will give you all the background and the webinars that are coming up. And if you get put onto the mailing list, then you will be notified of the webinars, which are very fascinating. And when you open your magnificently produced new magazine, which for those of you who aren't members of Northwood Shul won't know, that is our Northwood Synagogue magazine that's produced twice a year by our editors, Linda and Ian Patterson. There is a very full article from Jenny on TalkMatters as well. So thank you very much, Jenny, for spending your time with us this evening. I hope you're not going back to your Pesach cleaning. I imagine by your right hand, there's a glass of whiskey.
Oh, nice. I'm thinking.
Get the drinking of the whiskey in before Friday.
Not Pesach. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.